Judge William Harrison sat in his black leather chair behind the tall wooden desk in his courtroom. He had been a judge for 15 years in the small town of Millbrook. Every morning was the same for him. He would arrive at exactly 8 o'clock, drink his black coffee, and look through the cases for the day. William Harrison was a white man in his late 50s. He had gray hair that was always neat and clean. He wore his black judge robe with pride. People in town knew him as a strict judge who did not like to hear excuses. He believed that rules were rules and everyone should follow them no matter what. On this Tuesday morning in March, the sun was shining through the big windows of the courthouse. Judge Harrison was reading through a stack of papers when Officer Martinez walked into his office. Officer Martinez was a young police officer who had been working in Millbrook for 3 years. He carried a folder full of traffic tickets from the weekend. "Good morning, Judge Harrison," Officer Martinez said as he placed the folder on the judge's desk. "I have the traffic violations from this weekend. Most of them are simple speeding tickets." Judge Harrison opened the folder and started looking through the papers. There were 12 tickets in total. Most were for people driving 5 or 10 miles over the speed limit. Nothing unusual. But then he saw one ticket that caught his attention. The ticket was for Dr. Vanessa Williams. She was charged with driving 20 miles over the speed limit in a school zone. This was a serious violation because school zones were meant to keep children safe. Judge Harrison looked at the address on the ticket. It was from the nice part of town where the big houses were. "Tell me about this one," Judge Harrison said, pointing to Dr. Williams' ticket. 20 over in a school zone is serious." Officer Martinez nodded. "Yes, sir. I stopped her on Friday afternoon around 2 o'clock. It was right when the elementary school was letting out. Lots of kids were walking around." "What did she say when you stopped her?" Judge Harrison asked. Officer Martinez thought for a moment. "She was very polite, sir. She apologized right away. She said she was running late for something important. She mentioned a meeting or a flight, I think. She seemed really worried about the time." Judge Harrison made a note on the ticket. He did not like it when people used being late as an excuse for breaking the law. In his opinion, people should leave earlier if they had important meetings. There was no excuse for putting children in danger. "Did she give you any trouble?" Judge Harrison asked. "No, sir. She was very respectful. She had all her papers ready. License, registration, insurance. Everything was in order. She even thanked me for doing my job when I gave her the ticket." Judge Harrison raised his eyebrows. Most people were not happy when they got a ticket. They usually complained or made excuses. It was unusual for someone to thank the police officer. But this did not change the fact that she had broken the law. "What kind of car was she driving?" Judge Harrison asked. "A black BMW sedan. It looked pretty new. Clean and well-maintained." Judge Harrison nodded. He assumed that someone driving an expensive car from the rich part of town probably thought they were above the law. He had seen it many times before. Rich people who thought money could get them out of trouble. Officer Martinez continued his report. She asked if there was any way to handle this quickly because she really needed to get somewhere. "I told her she would have to come to court on Tuesday morning." "Did she ask about paying the fine without coming to court?" Judge Harrison asked. "Yes, sir. I told her that speeding in a school zone required a court appearance. She accepted that and said she would be here on Tuesday." Judge Harrison looked at his calendar. Today was Tuesday and Dr. Williams was scheduled to appear at 10 o'clock. It was now 9:30, so she would be coming soon. "What did she look like?" Judge Harrison asked. He always liked to know what to expect. Officer Martinez described her. "She was a black woman, probably in her 40s. She was dressed very professionally. She had on a nice business suit and carried a leather briefcase. She seemed educated and well-spoken." Judge Harrison made another note. He had his own ideas about what kind of person Dr. Williams probably was. In his experience, people who dressed nicely and drove expensive cars sometimes thought they deserved special treatment. He was not going to give her any breaks just because she had money. The morning continued as usual. Judge Harrison reviewed the other tickets and prepared for the court session. At exactly 10 o'clock, he walked into the courtroom and took his place behind the bench. The courtroom was small but formal. There were wooden benches for people to sit on, and a place for defendants to stand when their cases were called. About 15 people were waiting in the courtroom. Some were there for traffic tickets, others for small crimes or civil matters. Judge Harrison looked around the room but could not tell which person was Dr. Williams. Several women were sitting in the benches. "Good morning," Judge Harrison said in his loud, clear voice. We will now begin today's session. I want everyone to know that this court operates with respect and order. I expect everyone to be quiet unless I'm speaking to you directly. The court clerk, Mrs. Patterson, sat at a small desk next to the judge's bench. She had worked in the courthouse for 20 years and knew exactly how Judge Harrison liked things to run. She was a kind woman in her 60s who tried to help people understand how the court worked. "Mrs. Patterson, please call the first case," Judge Harrison said. Mrs. Patterson looked at her list. "The first case is Dr. Vanessa Williams, charged with speeding in a school zone." Judge Harrison looked around the courtroom, waiting to see which person would stand up. He was expecting to see someone who looked like they had money and attitude. He was ready to show her that his courtroom was not a place where money or status mattered. A woman in the third row stood up slowly. She was tall and carried herself with quiet confidence. She wore a dark blue business suit that fit her perfectly. Her hair was pulled back in a neat style, and she carried a leather briefcase and a small purse. She walked to the front of the courtroom with calm, measured steps. This was Dr. Vanessa Williams, though Judge Harrison did not know yet just how important this woman really was. Dr. Vanessa Williams walked to the front of the courtroom with her head held high. She moved with a kind of confidence that came from years of standing in courtrooms much bigger and more important than this one. But Judge Harrison did not know this. He only saw what he expected to see. Judge Harrison looked down at Dr. Williams from his high bench. She stood in the defendant's area, a small space marked by a wooden rail. Her hands were folded in front of her, and she looked directly at the judge. She did not look nervous or scared like many people did in his courtroom. "State your name for the record," Judge Harrison said in his serious voice. "Dr. Vanessa Williams," she replied clearly. Her voice was calm and professional. Judge Harrison looked at the ticket in front of him. "Dr. Williams, you are charged with driving 20 miles per hour over the speed limit in a school zone on Friday, March 15th, at approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This is a serious violation because it puts children in danger. How do you plead?" Dr. Williams took a small breath before speaking. "Your Honor, I understand the seriousness of the charge. I would like to explain the circumstances before I enter my plea." Judge Harrison's face showed his annoyance. He did not like it when people tried to make excuses before pleading guilty or not guilty. In his mind, the facts were simple. Either she was speeding or she was not. The reasons did not matter. "Ma'am, I did not ask for an explanation. I asked how you plead. Are you guilty or not guilty of speeding in a school zone?" Dr. Williams remained calm. She had dealt with difficult judges before, though not usually for her own traffic tickets. "I understand, Your Honor. However, I believe the circumstances are important for you to consider when determining the appropriate response to this situation." Judge Harrison felt his patience running thin. This woman was clearly trying to talk her way out of a ticket. He had seen it hundreds of times before. People thought that if they used big words and sounded important, they could avoid consequences. "Ma'am, let me be very clear. This is not a debate. This is a court of law. You were caught speeding in a school zone when children were present. That is a fact. Now how do you plead?" Dr. Williams looked at Judge Harrison carefully. She could see that he had already made up his mind about her and her case. She recognized the look on his face. It was the same look she had seen from many judges over the years, especially when they first saw her enter a courtroom. But those judges had been dealing with her as an attorney representing clients, not as a defendant herself. "I plead guilty, Your Honor," Dr. Williams said finally. "But I would respectfully request the opportunity to provide context that might be relevant to sentencing." Judge Harrison was surprised that she pleaded guilty so quickly. Most people who wanted to give long explanations usually tried to plead not guilty first, but he was still not interested in hearing her story. "The fact that you were speeding is all the context I need," Judge Harrison said. "You put children at risk by driving 20 miles per hour over the speed limit. The law is clear about this type of violation." Dr. Williams tried one more time. "Your Honor, I was rushing to catch a flight to Washington, D.C. I had received an urgent call about a case that required my immediate attention. I realize this does not excuse my speed, but I hope you will consider that this was an emergency situation related to my work." Judge Harrison shook his head. He had heard every excuse in the book. People were always rushing to airports or to hospitals or to important meetings. In his opinion, if something was really that important, people should plan better. "Ma'am, everyone thinks their business is urgent and important. The parent picking up their child thinks it is urgent. The person going to work thinks it is important, but none of that gives anyone the right to endanger children. Mrs. Patterson, the court clerk, watched the exchange with growing discomfort. She could see that Dr. Williams was not like the usual defendants who came through their court. There was something different about the way she carried herself and spoke. Mrs. Patterson had a feeling that Judge Harrison was making a mistake, but she could not interrupt. Dr. Williams nodded slowly. I completely agree with you, Your Honor. Child safety is the most important thing. I would never intentionally put any child at risk. I have children of my own, and I understand the responsibility that comes with driving through school zones. If you understood that responsibility, you would not have been speeding, Judge Harrison replied sharply. The fact that you have children makes this even worse. You should know better. Dr. Williams felt a flash of anger but kept her expression calm. She had spent years learning to control her emotions in courtrooms, especially when facing judges who seemed determined to misunderstand her. Judge Harrison looked at his sentencing guidelines. For speeding 20 miles over the limit in a school zone, he could impose a fine anywhere from $200 to $500. He could also require traffic safety courses or community service. He decided to send a strong message. Dr. Williams, I am fining you $500 plus court costs. You will also be required to attend a 4-hour traffic safety course within the next 30 days. Failure to complete the course will result in suspension of your driving license. Dr. Williams blinked in surprise. $500 was the maximum fine allowed for this type of violation. She had been expecting something more reasonable, especially since she had pleaded guilty and shown respect for the court. Your Honor, might I ask if this is the standard fine for first-time offenders? Dr. Williams asked politely. Judge Harrison did not like being questioned about his sentencing decisions. Ma'am, I determined the appropriate fine based on the severity of the offense and the defendant's attitude. Your attempts to make excuses and justify your behavior show a lack of acceptance of responsibility. Dr. Williams was confused. She had pleaded guilty immediately and had not tried to make excuses. She had simply tried to provide context, which was normal in most courtrooms she had experienced. I apologize if my words gave that impression. Your Honor, I accepted full responsibility for my actions by pleading guilty. I was simply trying to provide information that might be relevant to your decision. The only relevant information is that you were speeding in a school zone, Judge Harrison said firmly. The fine stands at $500 plus court costs for a total of $575. You can pay Mrs. Patterson before you leave today. Dr. Williams realized that there was no point in continuing the conversation. Judge Harrison had clearly made up his mind about her from the moment she walked into the courtroom. She had seen this type of prejudice before, but usually she was on the other side of it, fighting for her clients. Thank you, Your Honor, Dr. Williams said quietly. I will pay the fine today and complete the traffic safety course as required. Judge Harrison nodded. See that you do. And in the future, plan your travel time better so that you are not putting innocent children at risk. Dr. Williams turned and walked back toward the benches to gather her belongings. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on her. Some people looked sympathetic. Others seemed curious about why she had received such a harsh sentence. As she picked up her briefcase, Dr. Williams thought about the irony of the situation. In just 2 days, she would be standing in the highest court in the land, arguing a case that could change the lives of millions of people. But today, she was just another defendant who had been judged not by her actions alone, but by assumptions about who she was and what she represented. Dr. Vanessa Williams walked over to Mrs. Patterson's desk to pay her fine. She moved slowly, still processing what had just happened in the courtroom. $500 was a lot of money for anyone, but it was not the money that bothered her. It was the way Judge Harrison had treated her, as if she was just another person trying to talk her way out of trouble. Mrs. Patterson looked up at Dr. Williams with kind eyes. She had watched the whole exchange and felt uncomfortable about how harsh Judge Harrison had been. In all her years working in the courthouse, she had rarely seen him give someone the maximum fine for a first offense, especially when the person had been so polite and respectful. I am sorry about that, Mrs. Patterson whispered quietly, so Judge Harrison could not hear. He was having a bad morning before you even came in. Dr. Williams smiled sadly. It is okay. These things happen. Mrs. Patterson pulled out the payment forms and started filling them out. That will be $575 total. You can pay with cash, check, or credit card. Dr. Williams reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. As she took out her credit card, she also pulled out one of her business cards. She always carried them, even though she rarely needed to use them in her personal life. Could I please have a receipt for the payment? Dr. Williams asked. I need it for my records. Of course, Mrs. Patterson said. She processed the credit card payment and printed out a receipt. As she handed it to Dr. Williams, she noticed the business card that was lying on the desk next to Dr. Williams' purse. Mrs. Patterson glanced at the card without thinking much about it. But then she looked again more carefully this time. Her eyes grew wide as she read what was written on the card. The card was thick and expensive looking. At the top, in large letters, it said Supreme Court of the United States. Below that, in smaller but still clear letters, it said, Dr. Vanessa Williams, Senior Litigation Attorney. Mrs. Patterson felt her heart start beating faster. She looked up at Dr. Williams, then back at the card, then up at Dr. Williams again. She could not believe what she was seeing. Is this your business card? Mrs. Patterson asked in a whisper. Dr. Williams looked down and realized that her card was sitting on the desk where Mrs. Patterson could see it. She had not meant to show it, but now it was too late. Yes, it is, Dr. Williams said simply. Mrs. Patterson picked up the card with shaking hands. She had lived in Millbrook her whole life and had never met anyone who worked for the Supreme Court. She barely understood what a Supreme Court attorney did, but she knew it was something very important. You work for the Supreme Court? Mrs. Patterson asked, still whispering. Yes, I do, Dr. Williams replied. I argue cases before the court. Mrs. Patterson felt dizzy. She looked over at Judge Harrison, who was calling the next case. He had no idea what was happening at her desk. She looked back at Dr. Williams, who was putting her receipt in her purse. Judge Harrison does not know, does he? Mrs. Patterson asked. Dr. Williams shook her head. I tried to explain that I was traveling to Washington for work, but he did not want to hear the details. Mrs. Patterson felt sick to her stomach. She realized that Judge Harrison had just given the maximum fine to one of the most important lawyers in the country. She did not know much about the law, but she knew enough to understand that Supreme Court attorneys were very important people. Oh my goodness, Mrs. Patterson said, still looking at the business card. What should I do? Dr. Williams could see how upset Mrs. Patterson was getting. You do not need to do anything. It is fine, but Mrs. Patterson was not fine. She kept looking between the business card and Judge Harrison. She knew she should tell him, but she was scared of interrupting him during court. Judge Harrison did not like to be interrupted when he was working. Dr. Williams started to put her purse over her shoulder, getting ready to leave. She wanted to get out of the courthouse before this situation became even more uncomfortable. Wait, Mrs. Patterson said suddenly. Judge Harrison should know about this. It is really not necessary, Dr. Williams said. What is done. But Mrs. Patterson could not let it go. She had worked in the courthouse for 20 years and she had never seen anything like this happen. She knew that Judge Harrison would want to know the truth, even if it made him uncomfortable. Mrs. Patterson looked around the courtroom. Judge Harrison was in the middle of hearing another case. A young man was pleading guilty to parking in a handicapped space without a permit. Judge Harrison was being much more lenient with him than he had been with Dr. Williams. Mrs. Patterson made a decision. She stood up from her desk and walked quietly over to where Judge Harrison was sitting. She waited for him to finish with the current case before approaching. Your Honor, Mrs. Patterson said softly, I need to speak with you for just a moment. Judge Harrison looked annoyed. He did not like interruptions during court sessions. Can it wait until we finish these cases? Mrs. Patterson looked back at Dr. Williams, who was still standing by the desk. I think you should see this now, sir. Judge Harrison sighed. Very well. Let us take a 5-minute break. He announced to the courtroom that they would resume shortly and asked everyone to remain seated. Mrs. Patterson handed him Dr. Williams' business card. Judge Harrison looked at it quickly, not really paying attention at first. Then he stopped and read it again, more carefully this time. Judge Harrison felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at the card, then at Mrs. Patterson, then across the room at Dr. Williams. His hand started to shake slightly as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. This is the woman I just fined? Judge Harrison asked quietly. Yes, sir, Mrs. Patterson replied. Dr. Vanessa Williams. Judge Harrison read the card one more time, hoping he had misunderstood something. But the words were clear. Supreme Court of the United States Senior Litigation Attorney. He looked up at Dr. Williams again. She was standing by Mrs. Patterson's desk, looking calm and professional. She was not angry or upset, at least not visibly. But Judge Harrison knew that he had just made a terrible mistake. "Oh no," Judge Harrison said under his breath. "What have I done?" Judge Harrison stared at the business card in his hands. His mind was racing as he tried to understand what had just happened. The woman he had just treated so harshly was not just any lawyer. She was a senior litigation attorney for the Supreme Court of the United States. This was one of the most important legal positions in the entire country. Judge Harrison felt his stomach drop as the full weight of his mistake hit him. He had given Dr. Williams the maximum fine without even listening to her explanation. He had lectured her about responsibility and planning. He had treated her like she was just another person trying to get out of a traffic ticket. Mrs. Patterson stood next to his chair, watching his face change from confusion to horror. She had never seen Judge Harrison look so worried before. He was always confident and in control in his courtroom. But now he looked like a man who had just realized he had made a very big mistake. "She tried to tell me she was going to Washington for work," Judge Harrison said quietly to Mrs. Patterson. "She said it was urgent and important." "Yes, sir. I heard her say that," Mrs. Patterson replied. Judge Harrison looked across the room at Dr. Williams again. She was still standing by the clerk's desk, but now she was looking at her phone, probably checking the time. She needed to get to the airport for her flight to Washington. "I need to talk to her," Judge Harrison said suddenly. He stood up from his chair behind the bench. Mrs. Patterson was surprised. Judge Harrison never left his bench during court sessions to talk to defendants. It was not proper court procedure, but she could see that he was very upset about what had happened. "Dr. Williams," Judge Harrison called out across the courtroom. His voice was louder than he meant it to be, and everyone in the room turned to look at him. Dr. Williams looked up from her phone. She was surprised to hear Judge Harrison calling her name. She thought she was finished with her case and free to leave. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Judge Harrison asked. His voice was different now. It was not the harsh, commanding voice he had used during her case. It was softer and more uncertain. Dr. Williams looked around the courtroom. Everyone was staring at her and Judge Harrison. She could see the confusion on people's faces. They were wondering why the judge wanted to talk to someone whose case was already finished. "Of course, Your Honor," Dr. Williams replied. She was curious about what Judge Harrison wanted to discuss. Judge Harrison looked at the people sitting in the courtroom benches. "We will take a 15-minute break. Please remain in your seats, and we will continue with the remaining cases shortly." Judge Harrison stepped down from his bench and walked toward his private office behind the courtroom. Dr. Williams followed him, carrying her briefcase and purse. Mrs. Patterson stayed at her desk, but she watched them go with worried eyes. Judge Harrison's office was small but neat. There were law books on shelves that covered one entire wall. His desk was clean except for a few papers and a picture of his wife and 2 grown children. There were 2 chairs in front of his desk for visitors. "Please sit down," Judge Harrison said, pointing to one of the chairs. His voice was polite now, very different from how he had spoken to her in the courtroom. Dr. Williams sat down and placed her briefcase on the floor next to her chair. She folded her hands in her lap and waited for Judge Harrison to speak. She had been in many private meetings with judges over the years, but usually it was to discuss cases she was arguing, not her own legal problems. Judge Harrison sat down behind his desk and placed Dr. Williams's business card in front of him. He looked at it again, as if he was still hoping it might say something different. "I owe you an apology," Judge Harrison said finally. "I made assumptions about you and your case that were unfair and wrong." Dr. Williams was surprised by his words. She had not expected an apology. In her experience, judges rarely apologized for their decisions, even when they were clearly wrong. "I appreciate that, Your Honor," Dr. Williams said carefully. "But you were doing your job. Traffic violations are serious, especially in school zones." Judge Harrison shook his head. "That is not what this is about. Yes, traffic violations are serious, but I did not treat you fairly. I did not listen to what you were trying to tell me. I made judgments about you based on—" He stopped talking, not sure how to finish his sentence. Dr. Williams waited for him to continue. She could see that he was struggling with what to say. "Based on what you thought I was," Dr. Williams said gently, finishing his thought for him. Judge Harrison looked down at his desk. "Yes, and I was wrong. Very wrong." Dr. Williams had been in this situation before, though not usually as the defendant. She had seen the look on Judge Harrison's face many times over the years. It was the look of someone who had just realized they had treated her differently because of her race and gender. "Judge Harrison," Dr. Williams said calmly, "I want you to know that I understand what happened here today, and I am not angry with you." Judge Harrison looked up at her with surprise. "You are not angry? But I gave you the maximum fine. I did not listen to you. I was dismissive and rude." Dr. Williams smiled sadly. "I have been dealing with situations like this my whole career. I have learned that getting angry does not help anyone. What matters is what we do moving forward." Judge Harrison felt even worse after hearing her response. Her kindness and understanding made his behavior seem even more terrible. "You said you were traveling to Washington for urgent work," Judge Harrison said. "What kind of case are you working on?" Dr. Williams checked her watch. She was starting to worry about making her flight, but she could see that this conversation was important for Judge Harrison. "I am arguing a civil rights case before the Supreme Court on Thursday," Dr. Williams explained. "It involves voting rights protections. The court called a special session because there is an election coming up, and they need to make a decision quickly." Judge Harrison felt sick. Dr. Williams was not just any Supreme Court attorney. She was working on one of the most important types of cases possible. Civil rights and voting rights cases affected millions of people, and he had delayed her and treated her badly when she was trying to get to this crucial work. "How many cases have you argued before the Supreme Court?" Judge Harrison asked. "This will be my 14th, Dr. Williams replied. Judge Harrison was amazed. He had never even seen the Supreme Court building in person. Here was a woman who had stood before the 9 most important judges in the country 14 times, and he had lectured her about following the law and being responsible. "I have made a terrible mistake," Judge Harrison said. "Is there anything I can do to fix this?" Dr. Williams thought for a moment. "You could reduce the fine to something more reasonable for a first offense. But honestly, Judge Harrison, what would help me most right now is if you could make this conversation quick. I really do need to get to the airport." Judge Harrison immediately stood up. "Of course. I am so sorry for keeping you." He walked around his desk toward the door. "Let me take care of the fine right now." As they walked back toward the courtroom, Judge Harrison's mind was spinning. He kept thinking about how he had treated Dr. Williams compared to how he had treated other defendants. He realized that he had been much harsher with her than he was with most people, and he was starting to understand why. Judge Harrison and Dr. Williams walked back into the courtroom together. Everyone was still sitting in their seats waiting for court to resume. People looked curious about what had happened during their private meeting. Some whispered quietly to each other, wondering why the judge had taken so long to talk to someone whose case was already finished. Judge Harrison returned to his bench and sat down. Dr. Williams went back to Mrs. Patterson's desk, where her receipt was still waiting for her. "Before we continue with the remaining cases," Judge Harrison announced to the courtroom, "I need to make a correction to a previous ruling." The people in the courtroom looked confused. Judges did not usually change their decisions after a case was finished. Mrs. Patterson looked up at Judge Harrison with surprise. "Dr. Vanessa Williams, please approach the bench," Judge Harrison said. Dr. Williams walked back to the front of the courtroom. She was still carrying her briefcase and purse, ready to leave for the airport as soon as this was finished. "Dr. Williams," Judge Harrison said in a clear voice that everyone could hear, "after reviewing your case more carefully, I have decided to reduce your fine from $500 to $150. This is more appropriate for a first offense. Mrs. Patterson will process the refund for you." A murmur went through the courtroom. People were surprised to see Judge Harrison change his mind about a fine. This was not something that happened often in Millbrook. Dr. Williams nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Your Honor." "You are also no longer required to take the traffic safety course," Judge Harrison added. "I believe you understand the importance of safe driving." "Thank you," Dr. Williams said again. Judge Harrison wanted to say more, but he knew that the courtroom was not the right place for a longer conversation. There were too many people listening, and Dr. Williams needed to get to her flight. "Mrs. Patterson will take care of the refund," Judge Harrison said. Have a safe trip to Washington. Dr. Williams walked back to Mrs. Patterson's desk. The court clerk was already working on processing the refund. She seemed nervous as she filled out the paperwork. I will need to give you cash for the refund, Mrs. Patterson whispered to Dr. Williams. Is that okay? That is fine, Dr. Williams replied. As Mrs. Patterson counted out the money, she kept glancing up at Dr. Williams. She was still amazed that she had met someone who worked for the Supreme Court. Can I ask you something? Mrs. Patterson said quietly. Of course. What is it like arguing cases in front of the Supreme Court? Dr. Williams smiled. It is an honor and a responsibility. Every case affects real people's lives. That is what makes it important. Mrs. Patterson handed Dr. Williams the cash refund. I am sorry about what happened earlier. Judge Harrison is usually not so harsh. Dr. Williams took the money and put it in her purse. Mrs. Patterson, can I tell you something? This kind of thing happens to me more often than you might think. Mrs. Patterson looked confused. What do you mean? I mean that people often make assumptions about me based on how I look, Dr. Williams explained gently. They assume I am not as educated or professional as I actually am. It happens in stores, in restaurants, even in courtrooms. Mrs. Patterson felt sad hearing this. She had worked in the courthouse for many years, but she had never really thought about how differently people might be treated based on their race or gender. That is not fair, Mrs. Patterson said. No, it is not, Dr. Williams agreed, but I have learned to handle these situations with patience. Getting angry does not solve anything. What matters is helping people understand and do better next time. Mrs. Patterson looked over at Judge Harrison, who was now hearing another case. He seemed distracted and kept looking over at Dr. Williams. I think Judge Harrison learned something today, Mrs. Patterson said. I hope so, Dr. Williams replied. That is all any of us can hope for when these things happen. Dr. Williams checked her watch again. It was now almost 11 o'clock and her flight was at 1:30. She needed to get to the airport, which was about an hour away. I really do need to go now, Dr. Williams said to Mrs. Patterson. Of course. Have a safe trip, and good luck with your case. Dr. Williams started walking toward the exit of the courtroom. As she reached the door, she heard Judge Harrison's voice behind her. Dr. Williams, one moment, please. She turned around. Judge Harrison had paused the current case again and was looking at her from his bench. I wanted to wish you luck with your case on Thursday, he said. I hope it goes well. Thank you, Your Honor, Dr. Williams replied. Judge Harrison wanted to say more, but he could see that Dr. Williams really needed to leave. He watched as she walked out of the courtroom and disappeared down the hallway. After Dr. Williams left, Judge Harrison tried to focus on the remaining cases, but his mind kept wandering. He kept thinking about their conversation in his office and what she had said about dealing with these situations. Her whole career, the young man who was currently standing before his bench had been caught driving with an expired license. It was his second offense, so the fine could be anywhere from $200 to $400. Judge Harrison looked at the man, who was white and about 25 years old. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt and looked nervous. This is your second offense for driving with an expired license, Judge Harrison said. Why have you not renewed your license? I am sorry, Your Honor, the young man said. I have been working 2 jobs to pay for my mom's medical bills. I just forgot to renew it. Judge Harrison found himself really listening to the young man's explanation. A few hours ago, he might have given a lecture about responsibility and imposed a high fine. But now he was thinking about how differently he had treated Dr. Williams when she tried to explain her situation. The fine for a second offense is $200, Judge Harrison said, but I am going to reduce it to $100 because of your circumstances. Make sure you get your license renewed this week. Thank you, Your Honor, the young man said with relief. Mrs. Patterson noticed the difference in Judge Harrison's approach. He was listening more carefully to people and being more understanding about their situations. She wondered if his conversation with Dr. Williams had changed something in how he thought about his job. As the morning continued, Judge Harrison found himself thinking about Dr. Williams more and more. He wondered what her case was about and whether she had made it to her flight on time. He also wondered how many other times he had treated people unfairly without realizing it. By the time the last case was finished, Judge Harrison felt exhausted. He had been a judge for 15 years, and he thought he had been fair to everyone who came before his bench. But today had shown him that being fair was more complicated than he had realized. As he walked back to his office, Judge Harrison made a decision. He was going to learn more about Dr. Vanessa Williams and the work she did. He wanted to understand what kind of person he had misjudged so badly that morning. Judge Harrison sat alone in his office after the court session ended. The courthouse was quiet now. Mrs. Patterson had gone home for lunch and most of the other staff had left as well. Judge Harrison usually went home for lunch too, but today he could not stop thinking about what had happened with Dr. Williams. He turned on his computer and opened his web browser. He typed Dr. Vanessa Williams Supreme Court into the search engine and pressed enter. The results that came up made his stomach sink even further. The first result was Dr. Williams's official biography on the Supreme Court website. Judge Harrison read it slowly, his amazement growing with each sentence. Dr. Vanessa Williams had graduated first in her class from Harvard Law School. She had been the editor of the Harvard Law Review, one of the most important legal journals in the country. After law school, she had worked for a federal judge for 2 years, then joined a top law firm in Washington, D.C., but what really impressed Judge Harrison was her work in civil rights law. Dr. Williams had spent her entire career fighting for people who had been treated unfairly by the legal system. She had won cases that protected voting rights, fair housing, and equal education opportunities. She had argued 14 cases before the Supreme Court and had won 12 of them. Judge Harrison clicked on another link that showed a list of Dr. Williams' most important cases. He read about a case where she had helped ensure that people with disabilities could vote more easily. Another case had protected the rights of workers who faced discrimination at their jobs. There was also a case about making sure all children had equal access to good schools. As he read, Judge Harrison realized that Dr. Williams had dedicated her life to helping people who were treated unfairly, just like he had treated her that morning. The irony was not lost on him. He had been unfair to someone whose job was fighting unfairness. Judge Harrison found a video of Dr. Williams arguing a case before the Supreme Court from 2 years ago. He watched as she stood confidently before the 9 justices, answering their difficult questions with intelligence and grace. She spoke clearly and calmly, even when the justices challenged her arguments. Judge Harrison could see why she had been so composed in his courtroom, even when he was being rude to her. After watching the video, Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair and thought about the morning's events. He tried to remember exactly what he had been thinking when Dr. Williams first walked into his courtroom. He remembered seeing a well-dressed black woman with an expensive briefcase. He had assumed she was probably from the wealthy part of town and thought she could talk her way out of a ticket. He had decided before she even spoke that she was the type of person who believed rules did not apply to her. Now Judge Harrison felt ashamed of these thoughts. He realized that he had made all of these assumptions based only on Dr. Williams's appearance. He had not given her a fair chance to explain her situation because he had already decided what kind of person she was. Judge Harrison stood up and walked to the window of his office. He could see the main street of Millbrook below. People were walking to lunch, going in and out of shops, living their normal lives. He wondered how many times he had made unfair assumptions about the people who came before his bench. He thought about all the cases he had heard over the past 15 years. Had he been harder on some defendants than others? Had he listened more carefully to some people's explanations while dismissing others? The questions made him uncomfortable because he was not sure he wanted to know the answers. Judge Harrison walked back to his computer and started looking through his case records from the past year. He wanted to see if there were patterns in how he had sentenced different types of people. What he found disturbed him. When he looked at traffic violation cases, he noticed that he had given higher fines to black defendants than to white defendants for similar offenses. He had also been more likely to require traffic school or community service for black defendants. The pattern was not obvious because each case was different. But when Judge Harrison looked at all the cases together, he could see that he had been treating people differently based on their race, even though he had never intended to do so. Judge Harrison felt sick as he realized the extent of his unfair behavior. He had always thought of himself as a fair and impartial judge. He had believed that he treated everyone equally under the law, but the evidence in his own records showed that this was not true. He remembered a case from 3 months ago. A young black man had been caught speeding 15 miles over the limit on his way to work. The man had explained that he was late because his car had trouble starting, but Judge Harrison had given him a lecture about responsibility and fined him $300. Just 2 weeks later, a young white woman had been caught speeding 20 miles over the limit. She had explained that she was late for a job interview. Judge Harrison had been sympathetic and had reduced her fine to $150. Both people had been speeding for similar reasons. They were late for work-related activities. But Judge Harrison had treated them very differently. He had been harsh with the black man and understanding with the white woman. Judge Harrison found more examples in his records. A black mother who had been caught driving with expired registration had received a $400 fine and a lecture about following the law. A white father with the same violation had received a $200 fine and advice about setting reminders to renew his registration on time. The pattern was clear, and Judge Harrison could no longer ignore it. He had been unconsciously biased in his judgments. He had been treating people differently based on their race and had not even realized he was doing it. Judge Harrison thought about Dr. Williams again. She had said that she dealt with situations like this often throughout her career. Now he understood what she meant. She had probably faced unfair treatment from judges, lawyers, and other people in the legal system many times. Yet she had remained calm and professional when he had been unfair to her. Judge Harrison felt a deep sense of shame. He had become a judge because he wanted to uphold justice and fairness, but instead he had been part of the problem. He had been treating people unequally and contributing to the same kind of injustice that Dr. Williams spent her career fighting against. As he sat in his quiet office, Judge Harrison realized that this was a turning point for him. He could not undo the unfair treatment he had given to people in the past. But he could make sure it did not happen again in the future. He knew that changing would not be easy. The biases he had discovered in himself were unconscious, which meant he might not even notice when they were affecting his decisions. He would need to find ways to become more aware of his own thinking and to check his judgments before making them. Judge Harrison decided that the first thing he needed to do was educate himself. He needed to learn about unconscious bias and how it affected the legal system. He needed to understand how his own background and experiences had shaped the way he saw other people. As the afternoon sun streamed through his office window, Judge Harrison began to research training programs for judges about bias and fairness. He was determined to become the kind of judge he had always thought he was, one who truly treated everyone equally under the law. Judge Harrison woke up the next morning feeling tired. He had not slept well because he kept thinking about Dr. Williams and the mistakes he had made. He got dressed and drove to the courthouse, hoping that today would be a normal day and that he could start working on becoming a better judge. But when Judge Harrison arrived at his office, Mrs. Patterson was waiting for him with a worried look on her face. She was holding her phone and seemed very upset. "Judge Harrison," Mrs. Patterson said as soon as he walked in, "we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" Judge Harrison asked, setting down his coffee and briefcase. Mrs. Patterson held up her phone. "Someone posted about what happened yesterday on social media. It is spreading very quickly." Judge Harrison felt his heart sink. "What do you mean someone posted about it?" Mrs. Patterson showed him her phone screen. There was a post on Twitter that had been shared hundreds of times. The post was from someone named Sarah Chen, and it said, "You guys will not believe what I just saw at Millbrook Courthouse. A judge gave a black woman the maximum fine for speeding, then found out she was a Supreme Court attorney." His face when he realized was priceless. Unconscious bias justice. Judge Harrison stared at the phone screen. "Who is Sarah Chen?" "She is the court reporter who was here yesterday," Mrs. Patterson explained. "She must have overheard our conversation when I showed you Dr. Williams's business card." Judge Harrison sat down heavily in his chair. He felt dizzy as he realized what this meant. "How many people have seen this?" Mrs. Patterson looked at her phone again. "The post has been shared over 2,000 times since last night. And there are news reporters calling the courthouse asking for comments." Judge Harrison put his head in his hands. This was his worst nightmare. He had made a mistake, and now the whole world was going to know about it. "What are the comments saying?" Judge Harrison asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know. Mrs. Patterson scrolled through the responses to the Twitter post. "Most people are angry. They are saying things like typical racist judge and this is why our justice system is broken. Some people are calling for you to be removed from the bench." Judge Harrison felt sick. He had been a judge for 15 years and had never been in trouble before. Now his reputation and career were being destroyed because of one terrible morning. There are also news articles, Mrs. Patterson continued. The Washington Post has a story called Small Town Judge's Bias Exposed When He Finds Supreme Court Attorney. CNN has one too. Judge Harrison's phone started ringing. Mrs. Patterson looked at the caller ID and shook her head. It is another reporter. Judge Harrison let the call go to voicemail. He stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the street below. He could see people walking by, and he wondered if they had seen the news stories about him. What did Dr. Williams say to the reporters? Judge Harrison asked. Mrs. Patterson pulled up another article on her phone. Actually, she has been very professional about it. Look at this quote from the Washington Post. Mrs. Patterson read aloud. When contacted for comment, Dr. Williams said, I believe this situation provides an opportunity for important conversations about fairness in our legal system. Judge Harrison was doing his job, and I hope we can use this incident to help all judges think more carefully about unconscious bias. Judge Harrison was surprised. Even now, when she could have said terrible things about him to the media, Dr. Williams was being kind and professional. She was using the situation to talk about bigger issues instead of attacking him personally. She also said this. Mrs. Patterson continued reading. This type of experience is unfortunately common for many people in our justice system. What matters now is how we move forward and what we learn from it. Judge Harrison felt even worse after hearing Dr. Williams' comments. She was being so gracious about the whole situation, while he was the one who had caused the problem in the first place. Judge Harrison's computer chimed with a new email. He looked at the screen and saw that it was from the chief judge of their judicial district. The subject line said, Urgent media attention. Judge Harrison opened the email with shaking hands. It was a formal but understanding message. The chief judge wanted to meet with him that afternoon to discuss the situation. The email also mentioned that there had been calls for an investigation into Judge Harrison's sentencing patterns. Mrs. Patterson, Judge Harrison said, I think I should call Dr. Williams and apologize properly. Mrs. Patterson nodded. I think that would be a good idea. I have her business card right here. Judge Harrison dialed the number on Dr. Williams's card. After a few rings, a professional voice answered. Dr. Williams's office, this is Jennifer speaking. Hello, this is Judge William Harrison from Millbrook. I was hoping to speak with Dr. Williams about an incident that occurred in my courtroom yesterday. There was a pause. Oh, Judge Harrison. Dr. Williams is actually in Washington arguing a case today, but she left instructions that if you called, I should give you her direct number. She said she expected you might want to talk. Judge Harrison was amazed that Dr. Williams had anticipated his call and had made arrangements for him to reach her. Jennifer gave him a different phone number and told him the best time to call. When Judge Harrison called the direct number that afternoon, Dr. Williams answered personally. Judge Harrison, she said warmly, I was wondering when I would hear from you. Dr. Williams, I cannot tell you how sorry I am about yesterday and about this whole situation, Judge Harrison said. I made a terrible mistake, and now it has become a public embarrassment for both of us. Judge Harrison, Dr. Williams said calmly, I want you to know that I am not angry with you. What happened yesterday was unfortunate, but I have seen much worse in my career. What matters is what we do next. Judge Harrison was grateful for her understanding, but he still felt terrible. The news stories are making me look like a racist judge. My reputation is being destroyed. Actually, Dr. Williams said, I think you have an opportunity here. This situation has gotten people's attention. You could use that attention to show that you are serious about changing and learning from this experience. Judge Harrison had not thought about it that way. What do you mean? I mean that you could become an example of how people can recognize their biases and work to overcome them, Dr. Williams explained. That would be much more valuable than just hiding from the media and hoping the story goes away. Judge Harrison thought about what she was saying. You think I should speak publicly about this? I think you should be honest about what happened and what you learned from it, Dr. Williams said. People are angry right now because they see this as another example of unfairness in the justice system. But if you show them that you are taking responsibility and working to change, that could help rebuild trust. Judge Harrison realized that Dr. Williams was right. He had two choices. He could try to hide from this situation and hope it went away, or he could face it honestly and try to make something positive come from it. Dr. Williams, Judge Harrison said, Would you be willing to help me figure out how to do this right? Yes, Dr. Williams replied without hesitation. I think we can turn this into something constructive for everyone. 6 months after the incident that changed his life, Judge Harrison stood in front of a room full of judges from across the state. He was nervous, but he knew that this moment was important. Dr. Williams sat in the front row, ready to join him for a presentation about unconscious bias in the courtroom. The weeks following the media attention had been difficult for Judge Harrison. Many people in Millbrook had been angry and disappointed in him. Some had called for him to resign. But Judge Harrison had chosen a different path. Instead of running away from his mistakes, he had decided to learn from them and help others do the same. The first thing Judge Harrison had done was write a public letter of apology. He had published it in the local newspaper and posted it on the courthouse website. In the letter, he had admitted that he had treated Dr. Williams unfairly because of unconscious bias. He had explained how looking at his own case records had shown him a pattern of unequal treatment that he had never noticed before. I became a judge because I believed in fairness and justice, Judge Harrison had written, but I have learned that believing in fairness is not enough. I must constantly work to examine my own thinking and make sure my actions match my beliefs. The letter had received mixed reactions. Some people appreciated his honesty and willingness to take responsibility. Others felt that an apology was not enough. But Dr. Williams had supported him publicly, saying that his letter showed the kind of self-reflection that could lead to real change. After writing the apology, Judge Harrison had enrolled in training programs about unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity. He had studied how bias affected decision-making and had learned techniques for recognizing his own prejudices before they influenced his judgments. Judge Harrison had also started working with local civil rights organizations. He had volunteered to review his past cases with community leaders to identify patterns of unfair treatment. This process had been embarrassing and painful, but it had helped him understand the real impact of his biased decisions on people's lives. Most importantly, Judge Harrison had changed how he ran his courtroom. He now took more time to listen to defendants' explanations before making decisions. He had implemented new procedures to make sure he considered each case carefully and fairly. He also kept track of his sentencing patterns to watch for signs of bias. Dr. Williams had kept her promise to help Judge Harrison turn the situation into something positive. She had agreed to speak with him at judicial conferences and training sessions. Together, they had developed a presentation about recognizing and overcoming unconscious bias in the legal system. Now, as Judge Harrison looked out at the audience of judges, he felt grateful for Dr. Williams' guidance and friendship. Their partnership had become a powerful example of how people could work together to address problems in the justice system. "Good morning," Judge Harrison began. 6 months ago, I made a mistake that changed my life and career. I treated a defendant unfairly in my courtroom because of unconscious bias. That defendant was Dr. Vanessa Williams, who is here with me today. Judge Harrison went on to tell the story of what had happened that Tuesday morning. He explained how his assumptions about Dr. Williams had led him to treat her more harshly than he would have treated someone else in the same situation. "I thought I was a fair judge," Judge Harrison said. "I believed that I treated everyone equally. But when I looked at my own records, I discovered that this was not true. I had been unconsciously biased in my decisions for years without realizing it." Dr. Williams then took the stage to talk about her experience and the broader issue of bias in the legal system. She spoke about the research showing that unconscious bias affected judges, lawyers, and juries across the country. "What happened with Judge Harrison is not unusual," Dr. Williams explained. "Studies show that defendants are often treated differently based on their race, gender, or appearance. The difference here is that Judge Harrison was willing to acknowledge the problem and work to fix it." Dr. Williams talked about the importance of training and education for legal professionals. She explained how small changes in courtroom procedures could help reduce the impact of bias on legal decisions. After their presentations, Judge Harrison and Dr. Williams answered questions from the audience. Many judges shared their own concerns about bias and asked for advice on how to examine their own practices. One judge asked, "How do you know if you are being biased in your decisions?" Judge Harrison answered, "The hardest part is that unconscious bias happens without us realizing it. That is why it is so important to regularly review your cases and look for patterns. It is also helpful to have training and to work with community organizations that can give you different perspectives. Another judge asked Dr. Williams, "Why did you choose to help Judge Harrison instead of just criticizing him publicly?" Dr. Williams smiled. "Because criticism alone does not create change. Judge Harrison made a mistake, but he was willing to learn from it and do better. That kind of growth should be encouraged and supported." After the conference, Judge Harrison and Dr. Williams had lunch together. They had become unlikely friends through this experience, bonded by their shared commitment to improving the justice system. "How are things going in Millbrook?" Dr. Williams asked. "Much better," Judge Harrison replied. "The community was upset at first, but people have seen that I am serious about changing. I have had several community groups come to observe my courtroom, and they have said they can see the difference in how I handle cases now." Dr. Williams nodded. "Change is hard work, but it is worth it when it helps people receive fair treatment." Judge Harrison had also started mentoring other judges who wanted to examine their own practices for bias. He had become an advocate for judicial reform and had worked with state officials to develop new training requirements for judges. "I never thought I would be grateful for making such a public mistake," Judge Harrison said. "But this experience has made me a better judge and a better person. It has also shown me how much work we still need to do to make our justice system truly fair for everyone." Dr. Williams had continued her work arguing cases before the Supreme Court. She had won the voting rights case she had been rushing to that Tuesday morning 6 months ago. The decision had protected the voting rights of millions of people across the country. "You know," Dr. Williams said, "I get stopped for traffic violations more often than most people. Usually those experiences are just frustrating. But sometimes, like with you, they become opportunities for important conversations about fairness and justice." Judge Harrison laughed. "I hope our story encourages other judges to examine their own practices before they make the same mistakes I did." As they finished their lunch, both Judge Harrison and Dr. Williams felt hopeful about the future. Their story had become an example of how people could work together to address problems in the justice system. It showed that mistakes could become opportunities for growth and positive change. Judge Harrison returned to Millbrook that evening, ready to continue his work as a reformed judge. He knew that overcoming bias was an ongoing process that required constant attention and effort, but he was committed to making sure that every person who came before his bench received fair and equal treatment under the law. Dr. Williams returned to Washington, where she continued her work fighting for civil rights and justice for all Americans. She often told the story of Judge Harrison as an example of how people could change and grow when they were willing to honestly examine their own behavior. The incident that had started as an embarrassing mistake had become a powerful story of redemption and reform. It showed that even in a world where bias and unfairness seemed overwhelming, individuals could make a difference by taking responsibility for their actions and working to do better. Both Judge Harrison and Dr. Williams knew that there was still much work to be done to create a truly fair and just legal system, but their partnership had proven that change was possible when people were willing to listen, learn, and work together toward a common goal of justice for all.